And if I could request all of you gentlemen to please come into the center and in front for a group photograph. Thank you. Thank you very much. We're moving now to plenary session 5 on preparing the world to address global cybersecurity risks. The rapid rise of technologies like AI, machine learning, and deep learning has greatly expanded the realm of cyber threats, with increasingly sophisticated malicious actors relying solely on perimeter defenses is no longer sufficient to safeguard sensitive data. To strengthen our digital realm against these evolving dangers, we need a multifaceted approach that combines advanced cryptography, ongoing education, and global collaboration. So this session on preparing the world to address global cybersecurity risks will focus on these matters, aiming to create a secure and lasting global cyber landscape for future generations. And as soon as we have our days ready,
Okay, we're on. Well, the good news is I'm standing, so the chairs can all go, and the one that has my name next to it can sit there. But let me say thank you for being here this afternoon. I'm Brad Smith, the Vice Chair and President of Microsoft, and I'm here to give you an update, if you will, on the issues around cybersecurity in the world today. It's a changing world. It's a changing world for cybersecurity as well. And I'll do my best to share some useful information for you. I want to talk about the way the landscape is evolving. It's evolving quickly, and it's all characterized really by 4 fundamental trends. We're seeing more aggressive cyber criminals, more sophisticated nation states. As the world is shifting to the cloud, cyber threats are as well, and AI is entering the picture. Let me start with the problem. The problem today is that we live in a world where the cloud services, all of the technology that we use, is susceptible to attack. It's susceptible to attack by cyber criminals. I'll share a little bit of what we're seeing, as well as from nation states. And the sophistication is changing, the activity level is changing as well. I think it's especially important to take note of some of what we're seeing when it comes to ransomware. That, in effect, has become the favorite activity of cyber criminals. The volume is growing, and what's interesting is that the volume is growing principally driven by a relatively small number, 123 syndicates. Syndicates that, in effect, are offering ransomware as a service to others who want to buy that service from them. Now, the good news is their success rate is falling, which of course is to some degree why volume is expanding. If your success rate falls and you want to sustain your revenue, so to speak, you're going to have to grow your volume. Interestingly, as more organizations are becoming more sophisticated in their protection, the victims are increasingly smaller in size. 70% have fewer than 500 employees. To me, one of the things that's most disconcerting is as organizations become more capable in backing up their systems, meaning that they can protect themselves from the kinds of ransomware services that are designed to lock down their computers, we're seeing organizations adapt, criminals adapt by exfiltrating data and then, in effect, ransoming back the data so that it's not made public. But I think the interesting data point on this entire slide is this. Today, more than 80% of all successful ransomware attacks originate in an organization through an unmanaged device, meaning a device that doesn't have endpoint protection. That is an important lesson for everyone who cares about fighting cybercrime. On the nation-state front, we read most often about nation-state attacks in certain countries, but the reality is that there are basically nation-state attacks in most of the world. A great many countries are victims of this, either nation-state attacks that are designed to pursue governmental espionage of other governments, or in some cases, governmental espionage of private companies to try to extract trade secrets. We see more pre-positioning of malware, and in a time of war, as I'll come to, we see more use of that malware. But to me, the most disconcerting thing is this. It's that nation-state activity has increasingly focused on critical infrastructure. It's not just that the total number of nation-state attacks on critical infrastructure has risen. As a percentage of the whole, the last 2 years, it has been roughly 40% of all of the nation-state attacks we have seen. So today, if a country wants to defend itself, it's going to have to be able to defend and protect its critical infrastructure. Now, what I think we also need to keep in mind is something that it's easy to forget. Oftentimes I travel the world and people say, you know, these are just machines attacking machines. What is all the fuss about? When machines attack machines, the lives of real people are put at risk, especially when the attacks are focused on critical infrastructure, like the healthcare system, or the electrical grid, or the water supply, or the systems that control traffic. This has become an issue of substantial importance, I believe, to the world as a whole. That's the problem. Now, the good news is there is some real progress. At Microsoft, every day, we intercept 4,000 identity attacks every second, which means we've just intercepted 10,000 in the time it took me to describe that to you. We've now removed from the internet 100,000 domains that cyber criminal and nation-state groups were using to launch attacks against others. We're able to track in a very sophisticated way a growing number of cyber criminal and nation-state attack groups. All of that gives us a foundation to do even more. And in fact, it's interesting to just think for a moment about the resources that go into protecting cybersecurity today. There's roughly 5 types. Data. We get 65 trillion signals per day globally coming back into our data centers. And in that sea of data, every day, there are the indicators, the evidence that we can use to identify the threats that we need to address. The number of managed devices is growing quickly, not quickly enough, but therein lies another opportunity. As more organizations enroll their devices and ensure that employees' smartphones, laptops, other devices are protected, our ability to secure those devices goes up enormously. At the end of the day, despite all the data, people matter enormously. We have 10,000 security and threat intelligence experts. And what you see at Microsoft, you will see at other major tech companies as well. And we work with an ecosystem that spans the globe in terms of partners. Now, enter AI. As I'll turn to in a minute, it can be another game changer. I think when you take stock of the problem, it gives us a sign about the path we need to chart forward. We can do even better. The first thing we should remember is what I call the 99% solution. We could solve 99% of the world's cybersecurity problems if every organization would just do the 5 things on this slide. Start by implementing multi-factor authentication, apply zero trust principles, meaning secure network assets from an intruder, even if an intruder enters the network. Compartmentalize network resources. Use extended detection and response and anti-malware, especially device protection. Keep software up to date and protect the data itself. Our industry has advanced enormously in terms of these capabilities. We need to make it easier for customers to put them to work. We need customers to put them to work. And as much as that would do to solve 99% of the problem, we also need to keep something else in mind as well. 99% is not enough. The 1% that can get through that is more sophisticated, that is among the most sophisticated attacks in the world, matter enormously because they target the most sensitive resources in the world. And what that means is that we've got to apply lessons that we're learning and put them to work as well. If one thing has been true since time immemorial, one always learns from the threats that emerge during a war. And the war in Ukraine has been no exception to this. It's been a ferocious cyber conflict. It has involved hybrid warfare, the next generation, if you will, of amphibious warfare, meaning we've seen the use of kinetic weapons and cyber weapons at the same target simultaneously. We've seen an explosion in influence operations. So as we've never seen before, we've had to grapple with new aspects of cyber conflict. One of the things that we've found is the emergence of new lessons. There's three that I think matter the most. The first is that in a time of war, countries need to be able to evacuate their data. It's critical to remember that almost all the discussions we've had the last decade about cyber threats have assumed that countries were actually at peace. We never focused on the fact that data centers themselves can be destroyed by cruise missiles. That is part of a national defense strategy that countries need to think about. Second, as never before, perhaps almost never before in the last millennium at least, we've seen the defense of a country turn not on a government alone, but on a partnership between the government and the private sector when it comes to cybersecurity. And we've similarly seen the need for continuous innovation to keep pace with the battlefield that has been raging. It has put to the test something that we at Microsoft were part of creating 5 years ago, the Cybersecurity Tech Accord. We founded this in 2018 to bring companies around the world together, and today there are 157 tech companies from 6 continents that are part of it. And fundamentally, what we pledge is that we will defend the world. We are not engaged in offensive action, and we will build the capacity and work collectively to defend countries when that's required. And what we have learned above all else in Ukraine is something that I think should give us all heart. The truth is, when we do our best work, when we invest in innovation, when we work together, defense is stronger than offense. That is something we need to sustain. But to sustain it will require work, because the reality is that offensive capabilities are growing, especially for nation states. So what we need to think about is how we can build the next generation of cybersecurity defense. That is the challenge we need to meet as we look to the future. What will that mean? Well, I think it will mean a few things. First, it will require new engineering advances. It will require that our entire industry adopt new methods for creating and coding software. This is a discussion that's starting to evolve across the industry. It will require work. But with new engineering advances, and in some cases the recoding of software that exists today, we can take a major leap in better securing the software on which the world relies, on-prem, and perhaps even more so in the cloud. The second thing that we need to do is lean into the power of artificial intelligence. The truth is, one of the biggest challenges today is also one of our greatest opportunities. Think about what it means to get 65 trillion signals per day going into data centers. Even if we employed all 8 billion people on the planet in service of this effort, we couldn't keep pace with that amount of data. But think about what AI is so good at. In part, it is so good at identifying patterns quickly in data. And when you really think about the role of the private sector, the tech sector as a whole, the role of a company like Microsoft, there are 3 critical advantages we have. First, we have more data. We have more data than any single government because we run a global network. Second, we have better infrastructure. We are investing unprecedented amounts of capital and will continue to do so to create the infrastructure to use AI to be able to protect all of this data. And third, we have more experts. We have the best highly paid cybersecurity experts in the world, and so our opportunity, our need, is to harness all 3 of these things, and to make it work not only for ourselves, but for everyone. So when you think about something like Microsoft's new cybersecurity copilot, what it's fundamentally designed to do is enable a cybersecurity professional in the IT department of any customer to go to work when there's an incident, to analyze data, to discover the solutions, to produce incident reports, to provide information to others. The biggest shortage in the world today when it comes to cybersecurity is a shortage of cybersecurity professionals. We need to harness the power of AI to make the world's cybersecurity professionals more successful. We then need to combine this with stronger rules and accountability. As the challenge evolves, we need to ensure that international norms and multi-stakeholder diplomacy evolve with it. Everything we've done during the last 5 years to bring people together across borders, to combine the power of government and companies and NGOs, has built the kind of foundation that we will need. A foundation to strengthen international norms, to send a message to the world that critical infrastructure, that humanitarian action, that hospitals need to be off limits from cybersecurity attacks. And we need to drive and move our industry forward so that we can take even stronger action by working in partnership with others. In short, we need what people in India have been working on this past year, to bring together the businesses in the B20 and the governments in the G20 to build on what was described earlier this year as the Delhi Declaration, to take advantage of the fact that the world's governments are coming together here in September and have the opportunity to strengthen the norms on which we rely. But in short and in sum, we need to continue to innovate. We need to continue to innovate in technology, and we can do so. We need to move laws and norms forward, and perhaps more than anything, we need to invest in the partnerships, the partnership with each other, to bring ourselves together. If we can do all of these things well, and we can ensure that cybersecurity defenses continue to advance, that they outpace offensive threats, and we build a safer world. That, I believe, needs to be our goal. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Smith. With your permission, would you take on a few questions?
That's why I didn't use all my time.
Okay. All right. We have a couple of questions for you, and I'd like to just request Mr. Dilip Sani, MD Rockwell Automation, to please stand, sir. can have a microphone get to you. Yes.
Thank you so much. Well, Brad, thank you so much for great insights. A couple of things on a very important topic, of course. Two parts to my question. The first one is you touched upon the role that generative AI, or AI in general, is going to have to play in building this better defense. As you think about generative AI in the context of cybersecurity, do you also see any challenges?
Well, I think it's a really good question. And look, undoubtedly, generative AI will be used as a tool and a weapon. Undoubtedly, there will be people, cyber criminal organizations and governments that seek to harness the power of generative AI, to identify and develop more cybersecurity threats, cybersecurity attacks, as well as what we're concerned about in the field of what we call cyber influence operations. These nation-state efforts that are deliberately designed to mislead the population in another country. So the challenges are real. At the end of the day, though, I am an optimist about what we can do, as I described, in using generative AI for cybersecurity protection. In part, in the tech sector, I think we'll be able to use it to identify these patterns in data, to query them, to pull them together. I would say more than ever, so much of what we're able to do to even predict what will be done next is based on that kind of predictive learning. And when we equip our engineers with generative AI, they work faster. But more than that, I just think it's an equalizer for, say, smaller organizations. As I said, it is extraordinary to see the global nature of the shortage of cybersecurity professionals. And by the way, as some of you may have encountered, it's sometimes difficult to translate from sort of cybersecurity jargon to the language that a board of directors or a company's management or government officials really need. Generative AI, I think, can be helpful in all of that.
I did have a part B to my question, but I know others.
Can't hear you, sir.
I had a part B to the question, if I could ask.
If it's a short one, please.
Yes, it is. Specific in the context of manufacturing, which is the industry I come from. Any thoughts as generative AI meets industry, you touched upon critical infrastructure, right, meets cybersecurity. So if you could be a little bit more precise around the manufacturing industry related implications.
Well, I mean, look, one of the things I appreciate about Rockwell Automation, by coincidence, is you're headquartered in my original hometown, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in the United States. And so when I think about what you all are working to accomplish, automating every aspect of manufacturing, first of all, the potential is enormous. But second, it is entirely dependent on harnessing the power of data. And as you all obviously know better than me, you see AI enter manufacturing to make manufacturing more efficient. But any time you become more dependent on data, one needs to think more about the cybersecurity threats for data. And so there's more to be thought about, and I would need to think more about it. But I would think that what it probably does is makes cybersecurity protection of the entire process in manufacturing more important. One has to think about the future of warfare, unfortunately. And when you think about the history of warfare, what you realize is that militaries have often tried to destroy the manufacturing capability of their adversaries. If one can use cyber technology to disable manufacturing, it adds a new dimension. And this is where, unfortunately, we really do have to, I think, internalize the fact that cybersecurity protection looks one way in a time of peace and another way in a time of war, and we need to put the two together.
Thank you. Great insights. Appreciate it.
All right. Mr. Gary Gorba, founder and executive chairman, TrueU Inc., USA. Mr. Galba, you need to wait for the microphone to come to you.
Thank you.
And I suggest that the questions are kept a little short so that we can get Mr. Smith to answer them.
Absolutely.
More briefly as well, no doubt.
Less is more, less is more. Brad, first of all, congratulations on what Microsoft is doing to keep the world secure. And as you said, right, 4,000 compromised passwords per second. And you talked about the collaboration. So what's your view on the ICT players on a deeper collaboration to create a more secure digital platform? And as you said about the data, it's all about the data. The more data and richer data set we have, we can get ahead. So we'd love to get your perspective on deeper collaboration amongst the ICT players.
I think we have more and better collaboration today than we have in the past. And I think we'll probably need more and better collaboration 2 and 3 and 5 years from now, to be honest, than we have today. And I guess if there's one thing that I've learned along the way, it is a little bit of an unnatural act for competitors to come together to collaborate in an area like this, because to some degree it goes to the heart of our business with each other. But I do think that some good things are happening. I think that governments, interestingly, play a very important convening role. And I have to give credit to the US administration, especially the last 2 years. I think they've done a lot in terms of bringing our industry together. They put some pressure on us to work more closely together. They've adopted an executive order that in effect has raised a common standard for all of us. And one of the things I think we should all hope is that we get more collaboration among governments, because if they collaborate more closely, it will provide a more common standard, and I think that will play a key role in raising everybody to this constant evolution we need.
I agreed. I think that'll help us strengthen the defense, right? And as in the US we say, defense wins the Super Bowl. So go Niners this year, all right?
I won't go there.
All right, maybe we can take one more question. Mr. Chandrasekhar Bharti, Managing Director, ACE Micromatic Manufacturing Intelligence Technologies Private Limited. The mic is not on.
Hi, I represent ACE Micromatic Group. Just for context, it is India's largest manufacturer of CNC machines and a leader in Industry 4 software for discrete manufacturing. The question I have, and this is personal as well as academic, we were a victim of a sophisticated cybercrime about a month ago, one of our data centers. So what can businesses do to counter the sophisticated cybercrime that is increasingly is what we are seeing from the last at least couple of years? So what kind of strategies can we deploy in the future?
I think there's a few things that are worth thinking about. I mean, the first is, cybercrime is still a crime where most victims want to remain silent. And that's not helpful. It doesn't help us learn about the extent of the problem or learn from the need to do better. And the reason that companies stay silent is completely understandable. It's hard to argue that on an individual basis, one should speak out. But the more we can find ways to speak out when we can, or to facilitate information sharing, including with and through governments, the more we can overcome that part of the problem. I do think that there's this second element of just sharing of best practices, because more and more I think that the steps that need to be taken, as I showed, really are common for all of us. And so I think that there's a huge opportunity for more collaboration within, say, industry groups. The question about manufacturing is interesting. It highlights how within specific sectors, the nature of the problem may be common within that sector. And hence, I think that there's a real opportunity for improvement. Ultimately, the tech sector is going to have to continue, as it rightly should, to assume the highest responsibility in this space. And maybe I'll just say in closing, if I could, think about all of this in the context of the G20 and perhaps especially India, where we happen to be. India, more than any country in the world, in my view, has made bigger and more rapid advances since the start of this decade when it comes to something like digital public infrastructure. And now we're at a point where there's real interest in other countries in adopting that infrastructure. But for it to move, I think two things will be essential. The first is that it will need to move to the cloud. And the second is we'll need to enhance security. And we can't assume that every country will be as successful as India in securing this infrastructure. We cannot afford to have the countries of the world rely on infrastructure for their payment systems or their health data without strengthening that level of security. And the last thing I'll say is that I think that there is a role for business, not just in implementing technology, not just in sharing best practices, but to some degree to use our voice. Because we all have a choice. Do we want to live in a world where it becomes accepted practice for sophisticated governments with some of the world's largest intelligence and military resources to target the private sector, to target healthcare, to target critical infrastructure? Or do we want to use our voice to say there need to be rules of the road? And in the 20th century, the governments of the world came together and they adopted a principle. Even in a time of war, the countries of the world had a duty to protect civilians, especially in a time of peace. Shouldn't we expect the same thing? I think that too is part of what we have an opportunity to contribute. So
Thank you very much, Mr. Brad Smith. Ladies and gentlemen,
thank you.
President and Vice Chairman, Microsoft. Thank you for making the world safer. We'll just quickly make the changes on the dais and we move on to our next session, Actions for Global Economic Recovery. And we've got a fantastic panel that'll join us any moment now. Please remain seated, ladies and gentlemen.